theyeshiva.net.
There is a very important and fascinating moment in Parshas Shemos when Hashem, for the first time, reveals himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Namely, the nature of the revelation. Throughout Sefer Bereshis, the Ribbono Shel Olam, the Master of the world, has revealed himself and communicated with many an individual. He has communicated with Adam, the first person, first human being, first man and the first woman, with Chava. He communicated with the snake, with Nachash. Hashem communicated with Noach, communicated with Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rivka, Avimelech in a dream, Lavan in a dream. God has communicated to all of these individuals throughout Sefer Bereshis. And yet we never hear how he spoke to them. And we don't exactly know how he spoke to them. I guess if you're a prophet, you know what it feels like, what it sounds like, what the experience is. Obviously, somehow the prophet didn't doubt the prophecy. When Avraham Avinu was told to take his son and offer him as an offering, right? If I would hear such a commandment, what's the first thing I would do is I would go to a psychiatrist. And I would say, I'm hearing very, very interesting voices. I mean, many parents hear voices to kill their children. It happens in the kitchen sometimes every night. But thank God you don't think you're a prophet. Because if every mother and father would think they're a prophet, woe to our children. How do you know, how do you distinguish between mental hallucinations, between psychotic episodes, and what you perceive as a prophecy? You never thought about that, right? Did you? You thought about it? Knew what was your answer? It's an interesting question, no? It's not a simple thing. Because if the Navi was a normal person, he had to ask this question. People hear voices all the time, and they're dangerous. And we all hear voices, and a lot of these voices are very destructive, which is part of the human condition. Part of the human condition is making choices and distinguishing between voices that build and voices that destroy. Voices that bring you closer to your values and voices that bring you closer to your ruin. Ruin as R-U-I-N. Voices that empower you, voices that bring the best out of you, and voices that lead me to a path of chaos and destruction. For prophecy to be authentic, it means that the prophet had to be not 90% sure, but 1,000% sure that this is the divine communicating to him. How does that happen? Sefer Bereshis doesn't answer that question. How did God speak to Noach? What did it look like? What did it feel like? What did it sound like? I don't know. Hashem now reveals himself to Moshe. I would expect exactly the same story. God revealed himself to Moshe, just like it says Hashem spoke to Adam, he spoke to Noach. Vayirei lav Hashem, he revealed himself to Avram, he spoke to Avram. It says about Rivka, she wondered about her pregnancy. Vayomer lo Hashem, God told her. How did he tell her? What did it sound like? What did it feel like? But with Moshe, suddenly the story changes. God doesn't just reveal himself to Moshe, it comes with an entire dramatic backdrop. A lot of fanfare, a lot of fireworks, a lot of excitement, a strange image. And the way the Torah describes it is Moshe was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law. And he was in a desert. And he came near a place, a mountain called Chorev. And you would expect right here the Torah to say, God revealed himself to Moshe and said X, Y, and Z. That's not what happened. Moshe observed a labas eish mitoy chasna. He observed a burning bush. And many commentators say the sneh is a thorn bush, meaning from all bushes or shrubs, it's a thorn bush. And he sees a fire burning amidst this thorn bush. And what happens? The bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed. So Moshe says, Asurana, let me move away. Let me gaze at this sight. Why is the thorn bush not being consumed? Wood, this flammable wood, should be consumed by fire. Hashem sees that Moshe came to see, and he calls out from the thorn bush and he says, Moshe, Moshe. Moshe says, Hineni, I'm here. And God tells him, don't come close. Take your shoes off your feet, because the place upon which you tread is sacred soil. It's Admas Kodesh. Take your shoes off your feet. And then Hashem continued to speak to him and says, I am the God of your father, the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And that's when Moshe hides his face. He doesn't want to gaze. Then Hashem speaks to him about the pain of the Jewish people in Egypt and summons him and says, I want you to be my ambassador, my shliach l'cha ve'eshlochacha el Paroi. I want to send you to Paroi to take my people out of the bondage of Egypt. And then starts a whole conversation. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Moshe is resisting. Moshe is finding every reason why he is undeserving, why he is unsuitable for the job, why this is inappropriate, why it's not going to work, why he will be unsuccessful, and so forth, until God persuades him or compels him to embark on this mission. What we wonder immediately is why this change in the nature of revelation. What would be missing of the story if it would just say Hashem revealed himself to Moshe and he gave him this message? I am God, this is the mission, this is what I want. As he did so many times before. Vayomer Hashem al Avram lech lecha. Avram didn't see a burning bush. He didn't see anything. He heard the voice of God, leave your land. And then all of the other prophecies that existed, whether it was Avram or Yitzchak or Yaakov again, or Rivka or Noach, Hashem tells Noach, I want you to build an ark, I'm going to bring a flood. There's no burning bush. Where did it happen? Where was Noach at the time? Was he outdoors? Was he indoors? I don't know. Torah doesn't give us these details. Here, we're not just learning that God revealed himself to Moshe, but there's a whole way how he revealed himself. Obviously, this story needs to come with this backdrop. Somehow, in this story, it's not just God revealed himself to Moshe, but it's important to know how he did it. What is the explanation? Why was this medium chosen? And even if you want to do it in a much more dramatic way, not just reveal yourself to him or speak to him, but you want it to happen through some fascinating, intriguing, miraculous way, why was this medium chosen from countless other potential scenarios and episodes that could have unfolded in order to get this message over to Moshe? So I want to address today this question from three different perspectives. One is a perspective that is conveyed in the Medrash, in Medrash Rabbi. That's the first perspective. And the Medrash conveys the following message. This was intentional, this was purposeful, and it was essential to the very narrative. It wasn't only what he said, it was how the revelation took place. Because what Moshe Rabbeinu observed at that moment was not just a physical thorn bush on fire. All previous revelations in Sefer Bereshis were addressed to people as individuals. Even if they were to father a nation, but at that point, they were still individuals. This communication to Moshe was not as an individual, for him to take some personal journey, like Lech Lecha, or for him to go here, or for him to go there, or for him to do this or do that. This was a journey to assume the position of a leader. This is the first time you have such a communication. He is assuming the position of a manhig, of a shepherd, Moshe Hayaraya. He is going to be the one who's going to address the Pharaoh and ultimately stage a mutiny, a revolt against the superpower of the time. He's going to take slaves and mold them into a nation. He's going to become their first and greatest leader. He's going to take them out of their Egypt. He's going to make them a nation, going to give them Torah, going to lead them ultimately what would be for 4 decades afterwards through the desert. So here the nature of the revelation was different. And what does he observe? He doesn't only observe a burning bush. As the Medrash puts it, he observes much of Jewish history. In his first moment as a leader, he, and by extension every Jew, through reading, through learning, observes a phenomenon. And the phenomenon is a people who often would, sadly, tragically, and horrifically burn. Moshe was not just observing an individual bush in a desert that was on fire. He can see in that a manifestation of a long journey of a people that would be subjected sometimes in horrific ways to flames of hatred, to flames of animosity, to flames and passions of envy that would generate violence, discrimination, persecution, and often genocide. Moshe Rabbeinu would also see this on an individual level, not only on a collective level. He would see this in his people, he would see this in humanity. That much of life often comes with challenge, with difficulties. People are not always given the luxury of living the most tranquil and serene life where they could just sit in the sun and enjoy a tranquil life without any worry or anxiety. I don't know, maybe such lives exist, but it's not something so common. Moshe Rabbeinu would observe the fact that sometimes people have a fire burning. And what that means is there's something that threatens to destroy, to obliterate, to consume. I think if we would go through this room and everybody would speak, and the question would be asked, is there anything in life that bothers you? What do you think the answer would be? Nothing, huh? I remember I had a non-Jewish friend. His name was Tony. He was a therapist in Long Island. And I once met him, and I said, Tony, how is life? And he said, he called me Joseph. He said, Joseph, life is perfect. And he saw that I was startled. He said, why are you startled, Joseph? And I said, I ask people all the time, how is life? The first time I ask Jews all the time, I ask my brothers, how's life? How you doing? It's the first time I ever heard somebody say perfect. Usually it's like stomach, I have a stomach ache, I have a backache, I think I'm having a stroke, I might have had a heart attack yesterday, my wife thinks I'm about to die, I'm overweight, I eat too much, I eat too little, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, this, that. The best you'll get is not too bad. And that probably means the guy made $10 million yesterday. Not too bad. I said, perfect. Wow. So what makes your life perfect? And he told me that he finished building his kayak on Sunday. I said, how long have you been building it? He told me for 4 years. And he said he finished it and he took it out to the river on Sunday in the island, Long Island, and he said it was a moment of paradise. And I said, this ain't going to work with my brethren. I'm going to tell Jews, you want a recipe to happiness? Build a kayak for 4 years. Every free moment, just go to the garage and build and build and build. And after 4 years, take it into the river. Really? That's what I should do? I can hire somebody. And when Moshe sees this, it could get very discouraging. And therefore the story comes with another dimension. And that is, V'hasneh einenu ukol. The bush is not being destroyed. It's not being consumed. What is Moshe being told here? Moshe is being told, I want you to know that at the core of your people and at the core of every individual, there is a sense of invincibility. There is something that is indestructible. And never ever look at any situation in life and say, that's it, I'm a destroyed person. This has gotten me. I am spent. I am done. I am depleted. And lift up your hands in despair and a sense of melancholy and hopelessness. As strong as the fire may be, as strong as the danger may be, as powerful as the adversity and difficulty and headaches and sometimes situations that seem non-resolvable. What am I supposed to do with this? And ongoing, I want you to know that v'hasneh einenu ukol. The first thing you have to know as a leader is to be able to believe and to be able to empower yourself and other people to know that nothing is here to ultimately destroy you. Even though many of these fires may be mysterious, and one may not understand the reason and the rationale and the benefit. One may understand, one may not understand. One may understand a little bit, one may understand nothing of it. The most important thing to know is that ki ha'adam eitz hasada, this people will never ever be destroyed. How it's going to work out, you may know, you may not know. You may wrap your brain around it, you may not wrap your brain around it. I once heard from a girl, she's not here anymore, she died from illness a few years ago. I once heard from her, she said, at the end it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's because it's not the end. In other words, I may not always be able to wrap my brain around the meaning and how it unfolds. Intellectually, I may be completely in the dark. But life is not lived on an intellectual level alone. The intellect serves its purpose. Life is lived in the experiential experience of the now, of the moment. And a person ought to know, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was learning. The first experience you have of God is, what does it mean that there is a God in the burning bush? What does it mean God exists? It means that you're never ever lost. It means that you're never ever alone. It means that you're never ever abandoned. It means that you're never ever in a situation where you look at your life and you see only bleakness, darkness, pessimism, and destruction. There may be pain. The fires may be strong. There may be challenge. The challenge may be profound. But never ever allow that to translate into the next sentence, which is, I surrender to despair. I resign to dissolve into nothingness. I lose the core truth that ultimately there is something indestructible here. And even these challenges are here for growth, not for destruction. Reb Simcha Binim of Pshischa once said, when a person loses his money, he lost nothing. Money comes and money goes. When a person loses some of their health, they lost something significant. Not all of themselves, their bodies, maybe not their souls. But he said, I'll say in Yiddish and translate, aber wenn ein Mensch verliert den Mut, the courage. You know what courage is? Wenn ein Mensch verliert den Mut, hat alles verloren. When a person loses his or her courage, courage in Yiddish is courage. When a person loses his or her resolve, oomph, gusto, passion, drive, mut, the courage, then a person lost everything. So I may look at my life, you may look at your life, you may look at a situation, you may look at many situations, and you may read the map, and you may speak to people, and you may come back with the conclusion, and the conclusion is, this thorn bush is finished. It's gone. Let it just decay. And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, if this is the case, you have not gotten the message of the essence and the beginning of all of Judaism and of all religious experience and of all relationship with God. That you're never, ever, ever a victim in absolute terms. You're never, never in a situation where you look at life and you say, I'm lost. You may cry. You may feel the pain. Moshe Rabbeinu himself feels it. He cries, he screams, he protests. But never, ever gives up and never loses the courage and the resolve to find light and to find meaning and to find purpose and to grow from the experience. Message number one. Message number two goes from the historical to the psychological. And this is a commentary based on the commentary of the Delegitimize Ephraim, who was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Ohr Chaim Ephraim of Sedlikov, in his book Delegitimize Ephraim on Parshas Shemos, based on a teaching he heard from his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. And he shows us, like every story in Torah, it exists on a historical level, it exists on an individual level, on the outer level, on an inner level, outer layer, inner layer. And the Delegitimize Ephraim teaches the following. He says, Moshe observes a bush. It's on fire, but it's not being consumed. And he gives a completely different perspective. In this case, the fire represents passion, warmth, creativity. And I'm using the Delegitimize Ephraim. I'm going to elaborate it a little bit in my own words, the way I understood it. For a life to be full, you need to have fire. So you're stuck in fire. If a person is cold and dull and lifeless, it's very difficult to live. It's a fire, a passion. There was a mitzvah that a fire should always burn on the altar. To be alive means that there's a fire burning. Quite physically, physiologically. There's a warmth in the body, there's a fire in the body. The symptom of death is coldness. There was once a Rebbe, when he was a young child, he turned to his brother, and he asked his brother, "Was is Ayid?" His brother asked him, "Was is Ayid? What's a Jew?" He said, "Ayid is fire. A Jew is fire." So he said, "Really? Ayid is fire? If a Jew is fire, why when I touch you don't I get burnt?" He says, "Weil du bist euch fire." Because you're also fire. When fire touches fire, it doesn't get burnt. You're also fire. Bist euch fire. To live means to be on fire. Baal Shem Tov was once walking with his students. They were walking by a river in the Ukraine. And the river during the winter months, if you ever visited Russia, Ukraine, it gets pretty cold in certain regions, and many rivers and lakes turn into ice. And for months, often people sled, and they travel over it. Then, of course, the ice melts. You got to be very careful. And they were walking by this river, and there was a Christian fellow there. And he took the ice and he carved it into a tselem. He carved the ice into a cross. And the students saw this with the Baal Shem Tov, and they were very disheartened because they learned from their teacher many times that everything you see and you hear is part of your journey. Everything you see and you hear is a lesson in life. And they're walking with the Holy Master, with the Baal Shem Tov, and this is what they have to observe. During their stroll, this fellow carving out this ice into cross, I don't know if it was December 25th or some other day, but whatever the occasion was, they were very demoralized. And the Baal Shem Tov said, you just got one of the most important lessons in life. In Yiddishkeit, there's nothing as sacred as water. When a person wants to cleanse themselves, they go into the mikveh. The mikveh, the pool of natural water that God gives us from heaven, is the great cleansing power in Judaism. There's something in water that is very powerful. A child, a fetus, develops an amniotic sac in water. Throughout life, Adam and Chava, the genesis of life happens by the river that came out of Eden to irrigate the garden. V'nar yotzei me'eden la'ashkes hasagan. V'zarakti aleichem mayim tahorim utahartem. And throughout all of history, the mikveh is that pool of water where one immerses themselves and emerges, so to speak, as a new person. Purified, cleansed. That's water. And this is the water you're observing. And yet, when the water turns into ice, then you can carve out from this very same water a cross representing idolatry. He says sometimes when a person, even a very holy person, turns into ice, person becomes cold, then they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable to a type of emotional and spiritual disintegration. Because when somebody is cold, they become detached. To be a person, to be a Jew is to always be on fire. There's a passion, there's a warmth, there's a depth, there's a chiyus, there's a vitality. Coldness, when the Torah wants to describe Amalek, it says, asher karcha baderech. So the Medrash Tanchuma says, karcha comes from the word koir. He cooled you off. He made you frozen. Sometimes people camouflage their coldness as intellectualism. I'm a cerebral person. I don't get excited. I'm not a warm, emotional, fuzzy, roly-poly, emotional basket case. I'm cerebral. I'm aloof. I'm detached. But very often it's a cover-up because I'm afraid of touching life. I'm afraid of touching the texture of life. Life is too tumultuous. It's too real. So I stay away. It's like I don't want to go into the water because I don't want to get wet. So I stay away from the water and then I philosophize. I already build a philosophy around my fears. To have fears is not such a problem. Problem is when you build philosophies out of your fears. We all have fears. We all have insecurities. But if I can identify it as a fear and an insecurity, I'm already halfway through the remedy. Because I can identify, then I could choose. When I camouflage my fears with philosophical truths, suddenly I'm not afraid. There's a point behind it. There's a philosophy behind it. Now I'm stuck because now it's justified. Now what is really dysfunctional appears as something very important and very vital. All it's doing is causing me to remain stuck. Never ever cover up fears and insecurities by developing philosophical ideas around them. So sometimes my fear of attachment is so deep that my cerebral quality takes over because it's a very comfortable place to be in. You sit in an ivory tower of intellectualism and you analyze the world from outside. Somebody once came to me, a yeshiva, I was in yeshiva, and there was this kid, he was a funny guy, and he came out with me, he says, tell me, as an outsider, what's your perspective of the human race? So I told him, judging from you, horrible. So sometimes, it's just easier to assume this veneer of cerebral detachment. But really what I'm looking for is not intellectual truth. I'm looking to remain detached from life. I don't want to touch the texture. I don't want to get my hands wet or dirty or clean. I just don't want to touch it. It's too loaded. It's too intense. I'm afraid of intensity. And life is intense because all of life is constant movement. Even what looks lifeless is filled with millions and billions and trillions and zillions and sextillions of atoms that are in constant flow and movement between all of the components, protons and the neutrons and the electrons, and then the atoms forming as molecules. All of life is full of movement, full of passion, even if I don't always see it. So Amalek is asher korcha baderech. Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the teacher of the Jewish people forever, sees the bush being ignited, and yet the fire cannot penetrate it. Vasne einenu ukol, and Moshe says, Madua lo yivras. Now why? The Delegitimize Ephraim gives the following interesting interpretation. He says, sometimes your soul is on fire, your heart is on fire. It seems so promising. And yet, somehow, stubbornly, your bush, your thorns will not give in to the fire. There's a part that the fire will not consume. You would think the bush is on fire, the bush should be consumed by the fire. No, it will not. The fire will stop, it will burn, and yet there's a part of the bush that will stubbornly resist the flames and not allow the passion to go through them and penetrate them. What does this mean in a person's life? In a person's life, as he puts it, is a person is davening. The Delegitimize Ephraim is a person is davening. He or she thinks they're on fire, and suddenly out of the blue, some toxic thoughts enter into your brain, showing you in your mind that it's all futile and vain, that the fire was fake and merely a religious celestial illusion that has no real footing, because look at what just went through your mind. Sometimes a person looks at their own marriage. They always dreamt that it would be full with fire, full of passion, full of affection, full of love, full of creative emotions and bonding. And sometimes a person may feel this fire, and yet, hasnein and ukol, there's still so many thorns that remain in this marriage. Sometimes there are all types of interesting thoughts, and these thoughts seem to undermine the flame, to undermine the passion. And one asks, Madua lo yiver hasneh? Why will the fire not penetrate the bush? Why will the fire not consume my bush? Why is there a part of me that will never allow itself to become part of this flame? A person thinks they're living a healthy life, a functional life, a fiery life. And then one day you wake up, or one night you come home and you're overtaken by all types of thoughts and emotions and feelings that seem so negative, so depressing, so toxic and toxic. Thoughts and feelings and emotions that are demoralizing. Sometimes they're quite immoral or even promiscuous. Sometimes they really bring you back to a place that you don't want to be in. And they invite you there. And you ask yourself, will I ever get rid of all of these thoughts and feelings? Will there ever be absolute peace and absolute serenity? Can I ever really live with that fire? On so many levels, in so many different situations and cases. A person says, I've worked so hard to get rid of my anxiety. I've worked so hard to develop faith, to develop trust, to develop serenity. I've worked so hard to be a good mother, a good grandmother, a good wife. I have worked so hard to be a good person, to be a good Jew. I thought I have achieved so much. And then suddenly, out of the blue, all of these thoughts come into my mind, all of these feelings, all of these emotions. And I'm mamash a basket case. What happened to my 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years of work? It's like almost the devil, as somebody once told me, the devil standing in front of me and laughing in my face. Ha, ha, ha. You achieved nothing. And it's that moment that God tells Moshe Rabbeinu something very powerful. Stop. Al tikrav, don't get any closer. Take your shoes off your feet, because you're standing on sacred soil. The greatest mistake you're making is thinking that you have to get closer to touch holiness. But what I want to explain to you is that the place upon which you stand is sacred. To live a sacred life, to live a fiery, passionate life does not mean that you always get rid of all of your thorns. It does not mean that the fire penetrates every nook and cranny of your being. That's not what it means. There are sometimes thorns that remain inside my brain, inside my psyche, and they may forever remain there. That is not what will undermine your holiness, and it will not undermine your fire. All that is a reflection of the fact that the human condition is fraught with tension, fraught with choices, fraught with contradictions, that we were chosen to create a fire, to create warmth in a place of coldness, in a place of resistance. All it means is that I'm given different opportunities for awareness and for growth, not for despair and resignation. So when a person suddenly experiences all types of thoughts and emotions and feelings, the worst thing you can do is allow that to undermine your entire being, your entire existence by worshiping them. Identify them, see them for what they are. They are thorns, present to perhaps stimulate, challenge, make you humble, make you grow, use as a catalyst and a springboard for deeper awareness, or whatever the purpose may be. Maybe they're there for you to subdue, maybe they're there for you to transform, maybe they're there for you to go deeper into yourself. But you have to realize that the place upon which you're standing is sacred. Life never begins tomorrow. Life never begins after you graduate. Life never begins after the kids get married. Life never begins after you make money. Life never begins after you finish therapy. Life never begins after the kids are out of the house. Life never begins at any stage. Life is, as they say, what happens when you're busy preparing for other things. Life always happens right here, right now. The place where you stand now, in the present, is Admas Kodesh. Take off your feet, take off your shoes, take your shoes off your feet. That was almost like take your feet off your shoes. But I think better to take your shoes off your feet. Respect the space. Why do we take off our shoes? We take off our shoes in sacred spaces. We wear shoes to protect us from the crust of the earth. There's snow outside, there's ice outside, there's dirt outside, there's filth, there's mud, there's rubber, it's cold, it's hard. So we use shoes to protect us, to create a chatzitza, to create a mechitza in the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohanim were forbidden to wear shoes. They walked around all day barefoot on a marble floor. And in the Mishkan, it wasn't even marble, in the Mishkan, it was earth, as discussed in the previous classes with Yosef and Yehuda. But in the Beis HaMikdash, it was marble and it was cold, especially the winter months. Before radiators with electricity, I mean, there were fires all over the place. But it was still cold and they weren't allowed to wear even socks. They walked barefoot all day, and the reason is because we wear shoes so that our feet don't feel the earth. But sometimes your feet have to feel the earth. Sometimes your feet have to feel the ground. If you detach your feet from the ground, even with a sock or a shoe, you're creating an unnecessary and undesirable partition. Whenever it's Admas Kodesh, the only way you could be in a place of holiness is if you feel everything. You have to be able to feel what you're standing on. And that is why they stand without shoes, without socks in the Beis HaMikdash. And Moshe was told also to take off his shoes. It's how the Malbim explains the concept of chalitza. The concept of chalitza is an interesting concept. Somebody dies childless, and the mitzvah is that his wife marries his brother. It's called yibum, levirate marriages, but they don't have to if they want to, if they both agree. The alternative process is chalitza, which is a very interesting mitzvah in Parshas Kiseitze, and the highlight is when she takes off the shoe of her brother-in-law and says he doesn't want to marry me and perpetuate the life of his deceased brother who died childless. Why does she take off his shoe? What is the significance of this? One of the explanations is the shoe represents the journey of a soul down into earth, where you need the separation between the body and the earth in order to protect yourself. This brother doesn't want to bring down the soul of the brother back down to earth to continue it through a family. He removes the shoe so you remain aloof. But when you're touching sacred soil, Admas Kodesh, take off your shoes. So on a personal, spiritual, psychological level, Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, just because the fire has not penetrated you fully, do not allow that to delegitimize the fullness of your emotional experience, the fullness of fire. People often futilely await that day where romance will saturate every nook and cranny of my heart, brain, mind, and soul. Where love, light, affection, and closeness will permeate and penetrate and overwhelm my body and my soul, my entire organism, every one of my 40 trillion cells will wax poetically about my beautiful relationships with myself and my spouse and my parents and my siblings and of course my children and my friends and my grandchildren. And you're coming to the bar mitzvah. It's a day you waited for 13 years. You're coming to your daughter's wedding. You waited for this day 20 years, 17 years, 18 years. I don't mean 25 years. I don't mean to discriminate against any kehillah here. I don't know if it's 17 years you're waiting, or 18 years, or 19 years, or 20 years, or 25 years, or some people wait longer. You've been waiting for this day. It's supposed to be the happiest day of your life. You're going to lead your own child and daughter to the chuppah. And yet if people have told me that sometimes their most obnoxious, depressing anxiety and anxious thoughts come out at those moments, and it puts them into despair. You're making a l'chaim, you're making a vart, you're making a pidyon haben, you're making a bris, you're making a simcha, you're making a sheva brachas. Isn't it all about simcha? And yet, the truth is, some of the greatest basket cases at simchas are the ones who are supposed to celebrate it most. The only ones who enjoy it are the guests who are not paying for anything. We come, we go to the sushi bar, we don't stop eating sushi, we fight with others over the sushi, we eye the right sushi, we attack like cheetahs in the jungle, and we're all very happy. It's a nice free dinner, especially if you prepared something with so much ambiance, and you spent $20,000 on flowers, etc., etc. We have a great time. The only ones who are mamish overwhelmed and anxious, they don't know what hit them. It looks like they're mamish and this. Sometimes the people are supposed to be celebrating because there's so much stress that's involved. Now, part of the stress is because people are always thinking about other people. What's this one going to say? What's this one going to think? That's part of the stress. But part of it is also because at very sensitive moments, a lot of things come up. At moments of truth, deep things come up, things that you pushed away for many years. And this is the danger, that when these things come up, I say, where's the fire? What happened to the fire? And God says, relax, you're standing on sacred soil. A full, passionate life does not mean a life where there are no thorns. It does not mean a life where there are no thoughts that can undermine everything. It does not mean a life where you sometimes have experiences that are so demoralizing and alien to everything you believe in. Rather, it's exactly the opposite. It's the courage to be able to choose at such moments which thoughts I'm going to follow, which experiences I'm going to invest in. Am I going to follow my instincts or my values? Am I going to pursue my ultimate dreams, or am I going to pursue all of my insecurities and my voids which may exist, and may exist for a very long time? That's the choice in which the human splendor emerges. It's a choice that angels don't make. They don't deal with thorns. They deal with clarity. The beauty and splendor of the human being is that I choose what I'm going to allow to control the experience. And I always have that choice to make. Every person has that choice to make. There was a woman who lived in Israel. She was a poet. And she wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1960. And in the letter, people wrote him very personal things. In the letter, she wrote how miserable her life is. And she enumerated all of the agony in her life. She was a smart, intelligent lady. I've read her poetry. Brilliant person, deep. And she basically wrote to this person in Brooklyn about how miserable her life was. And he wrote her back a letter, a long letter, 1960 or 61. I saw it years ago, but I want to tell you one thing that remained with me. And he wrote to her as follows. Adam Harishon was in Gan Eden. He was in paradise. He had everything. He had health. He had money. He had a marriage, which was made in heaven. And he had a house. He had food, and the food was nutritious. No carbs, gluten-free. It was all vegetables and fruits. I mean, it was unbelievable. He was supposed to live forever, so there were no health issues. He wasn't dealing with any systems. He didn't have to worry about shidduchim. No mortgage. He was in the Garden of Eden. He was a guest in paradise. I mean, everything we kvetch about day and night, he basically was worry-free. And then God asked him one question. Why do you eat from this tree? And he answered, Ha'isha asher nasata imadi. He nasna li min ha'etz v'oichel. That woman that you have given me, she has been the curse of my life. She is the one who gave me from this tree, and that's why I ate it. And by the way, this is something that men still say till today. They blame what they eat on their wives, which is why most Jewish women who replicate Chava see part of their role as security guards. Very often, don't eat it, so he goes to the kitchen when you're not looking, and he eats it. When you give that the dessert at the Shabbos table, say, this is not for you. You eat grapes. Or even grapes are too sweet. This is not for you. This brownie with ice cream is not for you. Of course, he waits till you go back to the kitchen, or he sneaks out to the kitchen before benching, and he makes sure that he's not discriminated against. So this comes from Adam, who said, it's my wife. So Rashi says, Kan kafar b'toiva. As the Gemara says, he was a kfui toiva. God said, I didn't want you to be alone. I gave you a spouse. And now what you tell me is my life is cursed because I have this spouse and she ruined it for me. If not for her, life would have been paradise. So Adam in Gan Eden, if you asked him that moment, how was life? And he would say, it's miserable. Why? My marriage. And then the Lubavitcher Rebbe wrote to this lady, there were Jews that we both know who were, this is what he wrote, in the concentration camps of the Germans. It's the letter of 1960, shortly after the war. They used to wake up in the morning in the barracks. And the first thing they did at dawn before they went to work, call it work, before they went to be tortured for another day, they used to say Birchas HaShachar. They used to say brachas. What do you say in the brachas? Moida ani lefanecha, thank you for giving me my soul. Elakaina shama shenasata bi, thank you for my soul. Pakeya chivrim, thank you for allowing me to open my eyes. Matir asurim, thank you for allowing me to move my body. Zoikav kfufim, I could stand. Mal b'sharumim, I have something to put on my body as though they had something. Roikaretz alamoyim, this earth. Mechem etzadei gover, I can walk. They had nothing. They were skeletons. They found something to be thankful for. They found something in life that they could say, I'm grateful for this. I lost so much, but I'm alive. I could see. I could think. I could still feel. I can hope. I can dream. And he wrote to this lady, he says, you can be in Gan Eden and be miserable. And a person could be in the worst situations and find something to be grateful for. And if you're familiar, Viktor Frankl in his book, Man in Search of Meaning, where he developed his whole system of logotherapy, a major part of this system is based on this idea. He was in Auschwitz for years. And he said that he found that there was only one thing the Germans couldn't take away, and that is some meaning that you held on to. Whatever that meaning was. For him it was that he has a wife waiting for him in freedom, that he wants to write a book, that he wants to change the world of psychology, which he did in some ways, in many ways. So he wrote to this lady, he says, and most of us are not in Gan Eden, but we're also not in the camps. We're somewhere in between. And therefore, happiness or misery is not about circumstances. It's usually about a choice. How are you going to perceive your life? How are you going to look at your life? I could look at the thorns and I could look at the passion. They're both there. Moshe Rabbeinu says, but why is the fire not penetrating? And God says, stop, you don't have to get any closer. Where you're standing is sacred. At this moment, you could find the full connection. Of course you should grow. Of course you should challenge yourself. There's no mitzvah to have thorns. But it means in every situation, when there are those things that come into your brain suddenly and threaten to undermine everything, you could choose the fire rather than the thorns, even if the fire have not consumed and obliterated completely the thorns. There is that moment that stays with me. I think I shared it with you some time ago in one of our earliest classes. There was a fellow who won the Nobel Prize for economics. His name was John Nash. John Nash was a brilliant, brilliant man. Brilliant. Professor in Princeton University, economics, physics. He suffered from schizophrenia. His wife suffered equally as his spouse, and she divorced him because she couldn't live with his schizophrenia. His schizophrenia was so serious that his psychotic episodes basically told him that there are communists. This is in the days of the serious, this is during the Cold War, and the communists are here to kidnap him, abduct him. And he really felt it. And it drove him mad. It made him do things that were completely irrational and insane, and she suffered terribly and she divorced him. But she loved him, so she remarried him. What we call by Jews, machzir grushasai. She remarried him and she took care of him. And when he was on medication, he was fine. The problem is people who suffer from mental challenges because of the pain of it, and it's completely not their fault, often want to go off the medication. And he ultimately was disciplined to stay on the medication. She got him back into Princeton because he was fired. He wasn't responsible, he was fired. And he made it to the top, and he did amazingly well, and he received the Nobel Prize for his extraordinary contributions to economics, mathematics, economics. And it was an incredible moment because a person who has suffered so much due to an illness that was completely not his fault. Mental illness is usually completely not the fault of the person. It's a challenge that God has given him or her. And it's a very, very serious challenge. And in many ways, it's one of the most serious challenges because people don't know about it. And it's not easily observable. It's not like a physical illness that wreaks havoc in the body. It doesn't wreak havoc in the body. It wreaks havoc in the mind. So it's very, very painful. It's very deep. And our community still has a lot of stigma around it, which is part of the healing that is necessary for all of us in this area as well. Because it's completely not the person's fault at all. It's mamash a challenge that God has given him for some mysterious reason, among other fires that consume people that we spoke about in our first interpretation. And he wins the Nobel Prize. And they wrote a book about his life. There's a book, there's a film, a very famous story, Beautiful Mind. And he goes to Sweden to get the Nobel Prize. And he gets the Nobel Prize. And in the story, the way they depict it, he gives the speech after receiving the Nobel Prize. And in the speech he says, I have always wondered, what is the ultimate equation of mathematics? After all of the equations, what is what we would call the sachakal, the tamtsis? What is the ultimate summation of all mathematical equations? And he says, and today I know the answer. Where do they all come from and where do they all lead to? And today I know the answer, and the answer is love. And I want to thank my wife, he says, because without her love and dedication, I would not be here today. I wouldn't even be alive today. And the whole audience stands up and gives a standing ovation to his wife, who has endured, let's say, purgatory for his sake. And he gets the trophy, and the king rewards him with the Nobel Prize. And they walk out of the hall. And it's a moment that is very emotional because it's a triumph of the human spirit, no question. A person who has endured hell, quite literally and figuratively, the hell of schizophrenia and mental illness, and emerged on some level triumphant. And then, of course, call it Murphy's Law, call it Mazel, at that moment, the schizophrenia strikes. And as they're walking out of the hall, in his imagination, the communists have come from the Soviet Union, and they're standing right there about to kidnap him. And it's such a tragedy, because after everything's said and done, lazim tzeru, right? Give him a moment of nachas. No, the devil is right there. He never goes on vacation. He never goes on vacation, ever. They say Rabbi Chaim Brisker was resisting waking up for slichas when he was a kid. So his father, the Beis Halevi, says, learn from the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is up early in the morning making sure you don't get up out of bed. Learn from the Yetzer Hara. He says, Tati, no, the Yetzer Hara doesn't have a Yetzer Hara keeping him in bed. Ich hab a Yetzer Hara. My Yetzer Hara nicht kein Yetzer Hara. Not a bad response. And he went back to sleep. I can't learn from my Yetzer Hara. So the Yetzer Hara is always there to bring in the right thoughts at the right time. And the devil is there, and the communists are there. And his wife, she knows her husband. She sees that she lost him. Everything looks the same, but she knows he drifted away. She doesn't know where because she can't see his mind. But she knows. And she looks at her husband and she says, John, is everything all right? We know that nothing is all right. Absolutely nothing. He's gone. He is in a psychotic place. He's not here. He's not normal. He's insane. He's living in an alternate reality that is non-existent only in his mind. It's tragic, but it's real in his mind. And his wife says, John, are you all right? And he looks at her and he says, I'm perfect. I'm perfect. What he does at that moment is he does not get rid of the psychotic thoughts, but he knows enough about his life to choose and say, these are thoughts that are destroying me. They're here. They're real. They feel as real as anything else, probably more real than the Nobel Prize and the country of Sweden. But I'm going to choose to be in the world that I value, which is the world of my marriage, the world of my spouse. And he says, I'm perfect. And it comes with deep sacrifice. He was not perfect. But in many ways he was. Because human perfection does not mean I do not have thoughts that undermine my sanity. Human perfection means that in every moment I can choose what to follow. I'm driving a car, and if you're a Jewish driver, there is a backseat driver. Maybe your husband, maybe your wife. I don't know who does it in your family. But there's somebody who says, you don't know how to drive. I wish I would drive. I feel like God. I feel like confessing. I should call the Chevra Kadisha with you by the wheel. I mean, I know what my wife says when I'm by the steering wheel. I don't know how it works in your family. Your husbands may be perfect drivers. I'm also, but only in my perspective. Right? So you're by the steering wheel and you have this backseat driver who says, make a right, take the light. It's not a real stop sign. They really were supposed to remove it a few years ago. It's here by mistake. You're allowed to take a right on red. It's Monsey, it's not Brooklyn. Take a right. There's no police. Waze says there's no police. I see a police car. Waze says there's no police. Who are you going to believe, your eyes or Waze? Waze knows much better. It's Israeli Jews. They know much better if there's police on this street or you, right? What do? 3 options. Option number 1, you open the door and you throw them out of the car. There's only one problem, it's your spouse. That's one issue. And the problem with that is your shvig is going to be on your head for the rest of your life. That's problem number one. Choice number one. Choice number two is you say, okay, here's the steering wheel. The problem is if you give him the steering wheel, you go to the Hudson River. So then there's choice number three. Choice number three is I am holding on to the steering wheel. Thank God I have the steering wheel. And you're welcome to share all your thoughts about my driving. Take a right, take a left. You know, a lot of men have a problem with Waze because it's often a woman's voice giving them instructions. So it's one issue. For some people, it's an issue of tznius, they can't listen. And for other people, it's an issue of it's enough he has to listen to his wife all day. Now he's going to listen, which is why I told Waze to have a man's voice, because men get allergic with control. They do, Baruch Hashem. Okay. In Arabic. Okay, very good. So you hear the matzav, the point is not that there's no backseat driver. Well, here's the deal. In life, the backseat driver is in yourself. And he or she has a lot to say about everything. I told you don't know how to drive. Make a right, make a left, take a red, take a stop, go here, go there, drive to Miami, drive to California. You may not be able to shut down these thoughts. What you could, however, do is hold on to that steering wheel and choose the road that you're going to embark. And that makes all the difference. So the Degel Machane Ephraim teaches this profound idea that when Moshe Rabbeinu first spoke to God, the first thing Hashem revealed himself to him was, he gave him a path in Avodas Hashem, a path that will prove critical in terms of Yiddishkeit, in terms of all emotional growth. And that is, never ever wait for tomorrow to enjoy the holiness of today. Never ever decide or define holiness by some type of utopian, euphoric cleansing process where suddenly you're free from every beastly challenge, from every traumatic memory, from every toxic thought, from every negative emotion, from every difficult feeling. If I wait for that to experience the fire of life, I have to do one of two things. Either wait forever, or worse, deny a major part of me. I may have to amputate the backseat driver in my life, and when that happens is I become a person who is not living in reality, in my reality, because I was forced to destroy a certain part of me in order to justify the quality of my life. And whenever I'm forced, ladies, you understand what I'm saying? Because I was speaking to men, I would have to talk about this for 2 hours till they understand what I'm saying. This is important stuff, I think. If I have to cut off a certain part of my brain or my heart in order to be able to give myself the image, the experience of a life well lived, it means basically it's a horrible life lived because it's based on superficiality. I am forced to live in a delusion. I'm forced to live in self-deception. And any life that forces me to live in self-deception basically means it's not a life because it's not in reality. Because if I was living with realness, I wouldn't be able to tolerate this. And that's why it's so painful when people sometimes feel that they have to deny themselves to themselves in order to be fully alive, because look what's going on. What's the alternative? Not to deny myself to myself? You know what you're going to find over there? You know how many skeletons and demons? So God tells Moses the first time, you have to fear nothing. You have to fear no part of yourself. Yes, part of the bush is not consumed, and yet I tell you, you're standing on sacred soil. You're standing on sacred soil because right now and right here, you can suck the marrow out of life and extract the full meaning and the full potential and the full godliness of every single moment. Hamakim asher ta'omed alav admas koideshu. The soil upon which you stand right now is sacred. You could take off your shoes, embrace it, respect it, give it credence, because right here, right now, I am here with you, speaking to you. You only have to make one choice, to look this way or to turn around. Have a wonderful week. You're welcome.
So should we avoid the thoughts or we shouldn't avoid the thoughts?
What did you understand?
I understood both. You said we should not get rid of the thoughts.
Listen, if you could get rid of these thoughts, you try to get rid of it.
I don't know what you were saying. What was
Sometimes there are thoughts that I'm not going to get rid of. So I don't wait
You're saying not to amputate it, but then you're losing the
to amputate it unnaturally is not going to work. It's going to come back to haunt somebody. So suppress it also. There's no need to suppress.
But if you could suppress it so that it shouldn't bother you, like you suppress it.
So that's not suppressing. If a person could...
And you can suppress it. You have one option. Either yell at the person and move on what you do, or ignore it.
Right. So you can ignore, sometimes you can ignore, sometimes you could yell. But either way, you can't deny that the person is speaking. If you could persuade, if you can educate them to be quiet, that's awesome.
As you're driving,
You're welcome. If you can educate them to be quiet, that's awesome.
not while you're driving.
Okay, maybe it'll take a few months so you can educate them. Of course, I want to try to educate and come to a place of clarity.
So you should acknowledge that the thoughts are there.
Of course. You acknowledge that they're there, but you don't have to worship them.
But don't
You don't have to give them the steering wheel, yeah.
acknowledge that they're there, but don't.
Yes, yes. You understand?
Yeah.
And very often we grow and we mature and they could fall away. These thoughts can fall away, even be transformed.
Just yesterday I had an incident and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm talking about it today. Like, you never know where it's going to be.
Exactly. They pop in, yeah.
Very much.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.